off this list in our number 10 spot we have the Nina. The Nina was a ship that was once the flagship of the New York Yacht Club, but that unfortunately changed in 2013 when it disappeared on the Tasman Seas with its owner and 6 other people on board. The ship had left New Zealand and was bound for Australia on May 29th, and it was estimated to be somewhere from an 8 to 10 day trip. The last time the ship was heard from was on June 4th, and it wasn't until June 12th that the search for the ship began after friends and family of those on board began to get worried as the ship was now a few days overdue. The rescuers searched until it was called off on July 6th after they had searched 737,000 square nautical miles and had found nothing. The search was extremely thorough and they still were unable to find anything. No yacht, no debris, no life raft, and none of the people on board. The last communications with the Nina came on June 3rd and 4th as a crew member was contacting a meteorologist and router for Pacific cruisers in order to get some advice on where the ship should go so as to escape a nasty storm they were encountering. There was also an undelivered text message from June 4th that the satellite phone company was able to retrieve that stated that the storm sails had been shredded the night before and that they would update them later at 6 p.m. with the course info. This definitely wasn't an ideal situation, but the message didn't signal that they would have been in immediate distress either. Aside from these messages, there wasn't any other contact that seemed to have been attempted, despite the ship being well equipped with emergency radios, flares, a satellite phone, and all of that sort of thing. Right now, the best guess as to what happened is that the ship may have sunk really quickly following the storms, and it didn't allow any time for the passengers to activate any of the emergency equipment, but at the end of the day, this is all just a guess, and what exactly happened out there still remains a mystery. In our number 9 spot today, we have the mysterious Whale Dieoff. Between 2015 and 2016, there was a mysterious large die-off of whales located in the Gulf of Alaska. The deaths first began to be discovered in late May of 2015 when the carcasses of endangered fin whales were found floating near Kodiak. The total of whales found in the area climbed to 30, with additional reports of 5 other whales found in the waters just off of British Columbia. Because of the difficulties in retrieving the past whales, it was almost impossible to find out what exactly was causing this. The leading suspect was a toxin being produced by algae, but when one of the carcasses that researchers were able to recover was tested, it came up negative for the toxin that they were searching for. It is possible that the decomposition that had already taken place was the cause for this negative test, but it's also equally as possible that this just wasn't the cause in the first place. The good news is that since 2016, this strange and upsetting anomaly has stopped, so the whales are safe. But unfortunately, we aren't any closer to getting answers on what exactly happened here. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Kaz 2. The Kaz 2 was a 12-meter long catamaran that set sail on April 15th of 2007 and was found adrift just 3 days later on April 18th, but without her crew. When the ship set sail, she was carrying 3 crew members, all of which were relatively inexperienced sailors. On April 18th, someone in a helicopter reported seeing the adrift ship, but it wasn't until April 20th that maritime authorities were able to catch up with the boat and boarded it. It was then, however, that they uncovered the bizarre circumstances on the ship. Everything on the ship was perfectly normal, aside from the fact that the crew had just seemingly vanished. There was a meal set on the table waiting to be eaten, a laptop was open and on, the engine was still running, all of the life vests were still on board, and all of the ship's emergency systems were fully functioning. The only out of place things were, of course, the missing crew, the fact that one of the ship's sails was badly shredded, and there was no life raft on board, but it is still unclear whether there was ever one on board. There are many theories as to what may have happened to the crew, but none have ever been substantiated or confirmed, which leaves the fate of the 3 crew members a complete mystery that we may never get the answers to. In our number 7 spot today, we have the disappearance of Bas Jan Ader. Bas Jan Ader was a Dutch conceptual and performance artist as well as a skilled sailor. He set sail on July 9th, 1975 in a ship called the Ocean Wave as he was setting sail to make his single-handed west to east coast crossing of the North Atlantic. He estimated that this trip was going to take around 2.5 months, but it wasn't until 9 months after he set sail that his boat was found unmanned, floating almost vertically in the water. The people who found the ship were Spanish fishermen who then took the boat back to Spain, where it ended up being stolen. Throughout all of this, Baz was nowhere to be found, and even still, over 40 years later, the mystery of what exactly happened remains. There are people who speculate he fell overboard in heavy bad weather, but this is of course impossible to tell, especially with neither the boat or Baz to provide evidence. The information to go on has only been what was provided by the people who saw the boat before it was stolen, so of course that is not nearly enough to really have any questions answered. What happened to Baz on his sailing trip is still a mystery, but I do hope one day we find out at least some answers. In our number 6 spot today we have the Gulf of Mexico wreck. For almost 2 centuries, this shipwreck went undiscovered and undisturbed until the early 2000s when a pipeline bisected it, and since then it has been plaguing those who are trying to figure out what mysteries it holds. A team was assembled in order to try and search the wreckage, but every time they attempted, something went wrong that made it impossible for them. Every time they tried, the exploration sub would malfunction right before they were able to begin checking it out. Like, I'm talking about everything, from video monitors going out whenever they fired the thrusters, to the sonar breaking, to hydraulics going haywire, one after another. After this whole ordeal, the Navy sent a research sub that pretty much just ended up self-destructing its own rover once it got into the water, and when it made its way to the wreck, its arms were too short to reach anything to collect. So this is all to say that it seems like whatever mysteries this shipwreck is holding, they are destined to remain as such. I'm starting to think that maybe this shipwreck is cursed. In our number 5 spot today we have the disappearance of George Smith. George Allen Smith and his wife Jennifer Hagel Smith had just married and were aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, as they were doing a Mediterranean cruise for their honeymoon. On July 5th, 2005, the ship was somewhere just off of the coast of Turkey when it was discovered that George had disappeared. The night he was last seen, he was intoxicated from both alcohol as well as prescription drugs, and there was blood evidence found in his cabin as well on the side of the ship. There were 2 main theories in regards to his disappearance, the first being that his intoxication led to him falling overboard the ship, and the other was that perhaps a robbery had gone bad and foul play had been involved. This case was investigated for over a decade, with even the FBI and their mafia division getting involved at one point, but despite this, neither George, his body, or what really happened to him has ever been found. There have been many assumptions made over the years, but 16 years later, it is still a mystery. In our number 4 spot today we have the MV Tai Ching 21. On November 9th, 2008, a Taiwanese fishing vessel was found floating, but it was empty and had been totally gutted by fire. The 50-ton ship had obviously suffered a fire, but since there was no smoke anymore, it was clear it had been a few days since the fire was put out. Upon inspecting the ship, it was realized that the ship's lifeboat, along with its 3 life rafts, were missing, not to mention the crew of 29 missing men. The last transmission from the radio of the ship was on October 28th, but after that, nothing had been heard from the members of the crew and there was no mayday call ever received. The search for the missing men spanned 21,000 square miles or 54,000 square kilometers, and searches were conducted by both the US Air Force as well as the New Zealand Air Force, but unfortunately the search turned up no results. The last radio transmission from the ship was a personal call from the captain to his wife, which took place on that October 25th, but that was the last time anyone had heard. There still hasn't been any sign of the missing 29 crew members, which of course is absolutely devastating. It is clear they must have abandoned the ship after the fire started, but their fate from there remains completely unknown. In our number 3 spot today we have the disappearance of Rebecca Corium. Rebecca Corium was a British crew member and youth worker on the Disney Wonder cruise ship in 2011. In the early morning hours of March 22nd, Rebecca was seen on CCTV footage in the crew lounge speaking to someone on the telephone, and it appears as though the conversation was a bit emotionally distressing for her. A few hours later, people began to worry because Rebecca hadn't shown up for the start of her shift, which was really unlike her, and when people went to go and see if maybe she had slept in or something like that, they were unable to locate her anywhere on the ship, which of course made people even more worried. That CCTV footage of Rebecca is the last known sighting of her, and since then, no one has been able to figure out where she went or what happened to her. The first assumption was of course that perhaps she had gone overboard, and it prompted extensive searches of the waters in the area, but unfortunately nothing turned up. Almost an entire year after her disappearance, someone emailed Rebecca's family to say that she was 85% sure she had seen Rebecca with a man on the streets of Venice, but unfortunately this potential lead didn't turn up any real evidence or clues. Many people state that perhaps Disney Cruise Lines know more about what really happened, as other crew members have suggested that the entire ship is covered with so many cameras that there's no way that whatever happened could have been missed, but of course there's no evidence that has been discovered which would prove these allegations. It has been 10 years since Rebecca's extremely mysterious disappearance, and still no one knows exactly what happened on that terrible night. Hopefully one day some answers are found so Rebecca's family can get the closure that they deserve. In our number 2 spot today we have the disappearance of Jim Gray. Jim Gray was an incredibly important computer scientist who was responsible for many computer advancements that changed things for all of us. Other than being a computer scientist, he was also an experienced and skilled sailor, and one day on January 28, 2007, he set sail for a short trip so he could head out and spread his mother's ashes, as she had recently passed away. As he began his trip, Jim spoke to his wife on the phone and said he would call her once he got back in range. After their phone call, he called his daughter as well and left a little message for her, and then he was off on his trip, but unfortunately he never ended up returning. Jim's wife Donna was the one who raised the alarm bells as she was away on a trip, but like I mentioned, Jim said he would call her later, and he never did. At this point is when the huge searches began. Thousands of images of the area where Jim or his boat might be were uploaded to Amazon Mechanical Turk for people to look through and see if they could find any kind of signs, but to no avail. Jim also had an automatic emergency position indicating beacon on his ship, but whatever happened to Jim and the ship clearly didn't meet the requirements, or perhaps it had some sort of malfunction, or maybe it was even turned off. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jim or his boat, as no sign or trace of either has ever been found. The theories of what may have happened are endless and range from Jim intentionally disappearing to him being kidnapped for his computer skills and brain in order to do some kind of inside job, and really everything in between. There most definitely are theories that are seemingly more likely than others, but at the end of the day, they are all a possibility. In 2012, Jim's widow asked the court to declare him dead in absentia, which ended up being granted, so as of 2012, Jim has been declared dead, but that does not mean that he is. In our number 1 spot today we have the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. On March 21st, 1998, Amy and her family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship en route to Curaçao. On March 24th, after a fun night on the ship, Amy was hanging out and having a couple of drinks with the ship's band, and one of the members explained that she parted ways with them around 1 a.m. After this, around 5:15 a.m., Amy's father said he saw her sleeping on the cabin balcony. Unfortunately, however, once 6 a.m. rolled around, she wasn't there anymore, and this was the beginning of the mystery. Once it was realized that Amy was missing, extensive searches were launched for full days before they ended up being called off when no signs or traces of Amy had ever been found. While this is all super mysterious and nobody really had anything to go on, the plot only thickens with this story. After her disappearance, people began to report seeing Amy. One sighting was by Canadian tourists in 1998 who said that they had seen a woman who resembled Amy and who had tattoos that matched hers on a beach in Curaçao. A member of the United States Navy said that he saw her in a brothel and said that she told him her name was Amy and she asked for help, saying she wasn't allowed to leave. The most recent alleged sighting comes in 2005 when a woman claimed she saw Amy in a department store in Barbados. She said that Amy entered the restroom with 3 men who then threatened her if she didn't follow through on some sort of deal. The men left briefly and the witness said the woman turned to her, said that her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia and needed help, but the men returned right after to take her away again. This story is devastatingly sad and has so many turns, and to this day no one knows exactly what happened to Amy or if these witness sightings are accurate at all.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Angkor. This legend comes from Brittany in France. Perhaps the best comparison for this one is that of the Grim Reaper. The Angkor is said to resemble the Grim Reaper, wearing a black coat that covers his face. He also carries a scythe that strikes fear into the hearts of all who see him. Now, unlike the Grim Reaper though, the Angkor is not tasked with killing mortals whose time has come. His job is to guard the souls of the graveyard, to collect the ones that have been lost, and to bring them to his realm. No one living has ever seen his face, for to do so would mean certain death. His eye sockets are like smouldering ashes glowing with an eerie light. His eyes were removed many years ago by an angel who was angry when the Angkor attempted to rip the soul from a good untainted man. He is said to drive a black cart or hearse pulled by two horses. Some say it is the souls he harvests that end up working for him, loading his carts with bodies so that he can remove their souls later. If you hear his knock, a death in the family will come within just 1 year. If a person finds a red mark outside their door, it's a sign of an approaching illness. This became known as the Mark of Death. Perhaps the scariest aspect of the Angkor is that there is always room for one or more bodies in his cart. Some say he has never stopped harvesting souls and he will continue to do so forever. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Dame Blanches. Those of you who know a little bit of French might know this translates to the White Ladies. These mythical beings have been mentioned all over France, and the best description I've heard of them is that they're beautiful trolls. Not because they look like trolls, but because they are said to live under bridges. They wait for young men who need to cross. They love to dance and will crawl out from below the bridge to try and dance with the men. They are charming, and usually the men agree. If a man does, they will dance and then he will be allowed to pass without any problems. The men who refuse though will be thrown off the bridge to their deaths. Many people believe this was the key to their success. The survivors would always tell other people about the lovely women in white at the bridge who wanted to dance with them. The ones who knew their true terror would be dead and washed down the river. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Taurasi. When you think of dragons, many people would jump to China, but France has its very own. The Taurasi is a fearsome dragon-like creature that has been mentioned in southern France for generations. In medieval times it was said to devastate the land. Those who lived to tell the tale said it was a dragon with a lion's head, 6 short legs like a bear's, an ox-like body covered with a turtle shell, and a scaly tail that ended in a scorpion's stinger. They say it has teeth like swords and as big as horns. Sounds pretty horrible, right? Well, the people of southern France certainly thought so. Legend says the creature would hide in the river and attack passers-by after sinking their vessels. King of Nerlux was said to have attacked one with knights and catapults. The creature was almost impossible to kill. Saint Martha charmed the beast with hymns and prayers and led it back to the city. The terrified people attacked it as it slept, and the creature did not fight back, ultimately dying right there. The townspeople felt so bad that they renamed the city Tarascon in the creature's honor, a place that you can still visit today. Just keep one eye open as you sleep. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Kidney Thieves. The story goes like this. A man in Paris once had too much to drink, and when he stumbled into his home, he forgot to lock his door. The next morning he woke up naked in his bathtub, which was filled with ice. Next to the tub he found his phone and a note that read, "Call an ambulance right away and don't move." There was also a bottle of champagne in the ice and a national health insurance reimbursement form stapled to the note. The man panicked but had no choice than to follow what the note said. He called the ambulance, which took him to the hospital. The doctors were shocked to find that someone had surgically removed one of his kidneys. He used the medical form to claim the money back in medical fees and got 30,000 euros. Many people in France have spread this scary story of organ thieves who are sometimes willing to pay a fair price, but they'll always take what they want by force. Next up at number 6 now, we have the Vanishing Hotel. The story goes like this. 2 couples were driving through France on their way to Spain. To break up the journey, they decided to stay for the night in Montelimar in France. The hotel was full, and so they set out to find a new place to stay. They stumbled across a street with old-fashioned buildings and advertisements for a local circus. They found a hotel with some vacancies and decided to stay there for the night. They were surprised to find the hotel had no elevators or telephones. Every door had wooden catches on rather than locks. There were bolsters instead of pillows on the bed. The plumbing was very old-fashioned but seemed somehow new. Their bed sheets were made of calico, a cheap-looking fabric that hasn't been used to make linen for centuries. The windows were even worse. They didn't have any glass, just shutters. Despite the strangeness of this hotel, they stayed the night. Next morning at breakfast, they saw a few people enter the hotel. A woman in a long old-fashioned dress with button boots. Then there were 2 French policemen wearing old uniforms. The hotel bill was very cheap, less than 10% of what they they were expecting to pay. Nonetheless, they enjoyed their stay and decided to return to the hotel on their way back from Spain 2 weeks later. This time though, they couldn't find it anywhere. The cobbled road and the old-fashioned circus signs were still there, but the hotel was gone. It had disappeared. When they went to develop their holiday photos, all the ones they had taken of the hotel were missing. They weren't even just blanks either. The photos physically didn't exist anymore. It was like the hotel had never existed at all. These details have been verified by a number of historians, but nobody has ever been able to offer an explanation for this mysterious time slip. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Matagot. In southern France, people say the Matagot is an animal spirit. The interesting thing about this creature is that it takes the form of any animal it chooses. It's often a black cat, but can also be a rat, fox, dog, or even a cow. They are generally evil, but can sometimes bring wealth into a home if it's well fed. Traditionally, a wealth-bringing Matagot must be lured with a fresh chicken. The new owner must then carry it home without looking back once. If the cat is given the first mouthful of food and drink at every meal, it will repay its owner with a solid gold coin each morning. However, there is a catch. Nobody can keep a Matagot forever. They say if the owner is dying, they will suffer a long and painful death if they do not free the Matagot. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Gargoyle. The story goes that this creature was a terrible sea serpent who emerged one day from the Seine River and began to spew water about the countryside. It created a giant tidal wave, and whatever the waters did not kill, the dragon himself devoured for its meal. Its name literally means gargler for this reason. One day, the Archbishop of Rouen intended to put a stop to the problem. He knew the creature lived in a cavernous lair on the banks of the Seine River, and he intended to travel there to stop it from rampaging anymore. Nobody wanted to help him though. They said it was a suicide mission. Instead, he took with him 2 prisoners who were already condemned to death. When they got there, the beast attacked them ferociously. However, the Archbishop made the sign of the cross with his fingers, and then the dragon fell docile. They then bound the dragon by its neck and led it back to the town. There, the people condemned it to die by fire because it had killed so many with water. Fire raged for days until an enormous pile of ash was left behind. They cast the pile into the river from where the beast has originally come from. Ever since then, the drains that divert the rainwater from the roof of the local church building have been decorated with images of the monster as a reminder of what the people suffered through. Next up at number 3 now, we have the Beast of Gavaudan. This fearsome creature is not steeped in the mists of time from thousands of years ago. It's fairly recent and well documented, which perhaps makes it even more unnerving. The beast was described as a sort of werewolf, half man, half beast that preyed on people in the 18th century. The first report of it came in 1764. A young woman was tending to her livestock when the creature attacked her. It made several attempts before being driven away by her own cattle. She testified that the creature was a large wolf-like thing with reddish fur, small ears, a dog-like head, and a long tail. At the time, people thought this was just a one-off event, but they were wrong. Just a few days later, a 14-year-old girl was killed by the beast not far from the first sighting. Her body had disappeared, presumably devoured whole. Now it was serious. The villagers began to panic and the attacks got more brutal. There were several reports that people's heads were just being snapped clean off by the beast. The legend grew so big that even the King of France himself heard about it. No matter how many hunters he sent, the attacks kept happening. In the end, in 1767, 300 hunters finally tracked down the beast, which required a silver bullet to be killed. Some say they got it wrong though, and that this was just a large wolf and the real beast or its offspring may still roam the hills of France. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Les Lavandières. This legend has been spoken of in northern France for centuries. The name translates to the midnight washerwomen. They are said to be 3 old laundresses in Celtic mythology. The old women go to the water's edge at midnight to wash the clothes of those who are about to die. Those who see them say they're small, dressed all in green, and have webbed feet. This also led to them being called the night ducks. They are a terrifying omen of death to all who have seen them. It can mean a death in the family or the death of the person actually sees them. Now, despite their appearance, the washerwomen are said to be very agile and strong, almost supernaturally so. In other Celtic countries, if you can get between the women and the water, they will ask you 3 questions which you must answer honestly. If you do, you'll be given 3 wishes. However, due to their ominous relationship with death, many people will turn and run at the first sight of them. And finally, at number 1 now, we have the faux follet. You guys may have heard this called by other names in English, such as the will-o'-the-wisp or the jack-o'-lantern. It's some sort of atmospheric ghost light which appears in shades of faint blue. Other times it can be yellow, red or green in appearance. It appears suspended in the air, sometimes flickering, and often appears just briefly at night above cemeteries, swamps or bogs. Aside from its ghostly light, faux follets are generally harmless. However, beware, as these wisps are said to be spirits of the dead or supernatural beings. If you try and follow them, they will lead you to your death, and perhaps you too will become a wisp.
Coming in at number 10, we have the legend of the Barber and the Pastry Cook. Forget the demon barber of Fleet Street, meet the demon barber of Rue de la Marmozettes. Long before Sweeney Todd was slaying the people of Victorian London, a barber and a pastry seller had a little understanding. The barber would slit the throats of some of his customers, often students of the Notre Dame. He then allegedly had a flesh hatch leading to the cellar. His neighbour, a popular pastry chef who made pies for high-flying Parisians, including King Charles VI, would then factor them into his food. One day, a German student called Alaric visited the barber and was to be the unscrupulous duo's next victim. Alaric brought his dog along with him, and the canine sensed that something was amiss. He barked non-stop until people came to investigate what was going on. When the police arrived, they searched the barbers and found out about the whole affair. They found the cellar and the tools used to skin the corpses and cut up their flesh. The barber and the pastry chef confessed and were burned alive in a cage for their crime. Coming in at number 9, we have the ghost of Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison of The Doors is a famous member of the 27 Club. He was a rock and roll star and the frontman of the American band The Doors. There is much to be said about Jim, his life and his legacy, but he is perhaps best summarized as sex, drugs and rock and roll personified. In the last few months of his life, he moved to Paris, where he seemed to find some semblance of peace. Sadly, on July 3rd, 1971, he was found dead in the bathtub of his and his wife Pamela Courson's apartment. He was buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery, a popular tourist attraction. Also buried there are Oscar Wilde and Edith Piaf. Anyway, back in 1997, an American rock historian, Brett Meisner, went to visit Jim Morrison's grave and he took this picture. Oh look, it's Jim Morrison's ghost. The picture was evaluated and declared to be legit. Morrison is in one of his classic poses, and it gets even weirder. Meisner was plagued with bad luck since visiting the cemetery. Coming in at number 8, we have the mysterious man in the black coat. I love a fun time ghost, and the man in the black coat seems to be just that. He's bringing good times to those that dare to take up his offer. In 1925, Jean Romier reported a strange evening that began at the Jardin de Luxembourg. He said that a polite man in a black coat asked if he wanted to come to a chamber concert at his home. Totally all about the fun times, Romier decided, you know what, why not, and he went for it. He enjoyed an evening of music and poetry, albeit slightly haunting. After he left, he realized that he had unfortunately left his Zippo lighter in the apartment, so he decided to pop back and get it. When he returned to the apartment on the Rue de Vaugirard, a neighbor heard the knocking and informed him that the apartment had been unoccupied since its previous tenant, a musician, passed away 20 years ago. The legend of the man in the black coat has been going strong for nearly 100 years. While others have reported seeing the man in the Jardin, few people have accepted the offer of a private chamber orchestra. What would you do? Coming in at number 7, we have the Street of the Fishing Cat. There is now a very narrow road in Paris called Rue de la Chatte qui Pêche, Street of the Fishing Cat. This alley was built in 1540 and used to be called the Street of Ovens. It leads straight on down to the River Seine. Now the legend goes that in the 16th century, an alchemist lived along this street with his jet black cat. The cat, it seems, was a very gifted fisher who was able to catch fish out of the Seine using just one swipe of its paw. The cat was often spotted prowling by the river looking for fish. Local students took a disliking to the cat, deciding that they thought it was evil. For this reason, the 3 students decided to murder the cat, then throw its body in the Seine. Weirdly, once the cat disappeared, so did the alchemist it belonged to. Some years later, a man that looked a lot like him was regularly spotted walking along the Seine, looking like a ghostly traveller. Others reported spotting a phantom cat, still pouring at the water, hoping to catch a fish. Coming in at number 6, we have the Forest of Rambourg. The French Forest of Rambourg is home to a classic urban legend, the one about the boyfriend dying while the girl was in the car. It's actually told in so many variations across the world. Now, this variation says that a couple were driving through the forest in the 1960s in search of a spot to park up and make out. I don't call Paris the love capital for nothing. Once they found a spot, they hooked up. The guy gets out of the car to go for a pee. When he doesn't come back within 5 or so minutes, the girl gets nervous and starts looking around for him. Getting out of the car, she sees a scary-looking man in the shadows and what she thinks is the glimmer of a knife. She gets into the car and tries to drive away to look for her boyfriend. Then she hears some muffled sounds and some squeaking and a tapping on the roof of the car, but she drives off. Now, when she looks in her rearview mirror, she sees her boyfriend hanging from a tree. The tapping was his feet on the roof of the car as she drove off. Sadly, when the car went forward, she pulled the plinth out from underneath him and ensured his death. Brutal. This urban legend is retold so many times across the world, though I don't know if it's true. Coming into number 5, we have the iconic legends of the Catacombs of Paris. Put it this way, we could do a whole top 10 on the legends of the Parisian catacombs. Under the city of Paris lay the remains of more than 6 million people spread over 200 miles of intricate tunnels. Only a very, very small section is open to the public, which has set imaginations wild. Apparently, the creepy underground body of tunnels were built to deal with the city's problem of overflowing cemeteries. I think about this a lot, actually. As populations increase, more and more people die. If they aren't cremated, their bones are left in the ground. Like, how long is it going to be until the ground is full? Are we going to start using bodies as building materials? That could be creepy, but efficient. Anyway, because of the mystery and morbid nature of the catacombs, many rumors have cropped up as to what is happening down there. Some say they're home to albino alligators. Others say they're the home of a number of serial killers, the meeting place for Masonic cults, a spooky gathering spots for Satanists. Some even say that they housed the Nazis during the Second World War. Speaking of Nazis, have a listen to this urban legend from the Pont Marie Bridge at number 4. World War II era Europe was filled with treachery, sacrifice, and heartbreak. There were spies everywhere. Legend has it that during the French occupation, a Parisian woman was married to a resistance fighter, but was having an affair with a Nazi officer who she was using for information to feed back to the resistance. Now, I don't know if you know Paris in the winter, but it is cold. So cold. One night the woman was meeting her husband on the Pont Marie Bridge, but he never showed. She waited and waited for him, but he never came. Sadly, as she waited for her husband, the love of her life, she froze to death and died on the bridge. Her phantom is said to still haunt the bridge to this day, and people have reported seeing an apparition of a sobbing woman. When they go to console her, she disappears. Going down from the bridge right into the River Seine, coming in at number 3, we have the bodies of the River Seine. The River Seine is one of the most famous and romantic bodies of water in the world. Endlessly romanticized in paintings and literature, the river is synonymous with the city of love. That being said, it's actually kind of janky. The water has flowed through the city for over 1,000 years and has seen its fair share of sewage, so much so that some people refer to it as an open sewer. That isn't the only thing scary about the Seine though. Locals will tell you that it is filled with bodies, and this one urban legend, unfortunately, is pretty true. Not only is the Seine a popular suicide spot, it is a popular body dumping spot for murderers. In 2008, supermodel Katusha Nian's body was pulled out of the water after she fell into the river drunk. In 1961, the Parisian police carried out a massacre on the pro-national liberation front. Now, they killed between 40 to 200 people and dumped their bodies in the river. The mass murder was covered up, but the bodies of the dead Algerians still remain lost in the water. Coming in at number 2, we have the Red Man of Tuileries Palace. Different variations of this urban legend suggest that the Red Man spotted outside of Tuileries Palace in Paris was a local butcher, whereas others say that he was a henchman of the 16th century Queen Catherine de Medici. Both legends agree that he was named Jean and that the Queen had him killed because the man held way too many of the crown's secrets. A while after his death, a man was spotted in blood-red attire wandering the gardens. One man who spoke to his ghost, Neuville, reported that Jean swore vengeance on the Queen and the crown. Now, aristocrats of the palace thought that he was a sign of bad luck to come, and indeed, Marie Antoinette supposedly saw him shortly before meeting the guillotine. Napoleon, however, quite liked the fellow and would talk to him about war strategy. Those visiting the old palace today occasionally spot the man in red. Oh dear. Finally, coming in at number 1, we have one of the most famous Parisian urban legends. We have the Phantom of the Opera. Not only is it in my top 5 favourite musicals of all time, but Phantom of the Opera is actually based on a real-life urban legend. Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical is based on a novel by Gaston Leroux, but in turn, Leroux based his novel on real-life reports of strange goings-on at the Opera Garnier. The famous opera house, now home of the National Opera, was built in 1875 and reportedly is haunted by a number of ghosts, but one in particular stands out: the Phantom. In 1896, one of the theatre's grand chandeliers did indeed break, fall and kill someone, like in the novel and the musical. Strange reports of otherworldly goings-on still exist to this day, and it was said for a long time that the theatre was built on some kind of watery underground layer, like the Phantoms. In actuality, this is kind of true. The Opera House is built on a water tank, and who knows what's happening down there in those watery depths.